The stone-throwing ghost. Stone-throwing poltergeists have existed since at least 500 AD, when Helpidius, the personal physician of Theodoric the Great, experienced a barrage of falling stones. For several months, his residence in Rome gained notoriety for the flying stones that mysteriously struck his roof from an unseen source. In 858 AD, a farmer near Bingen, Germany, along the Rhine River, experienced an unusual attack from falling stones. Convinced that a demon was attacking him, a priest was sent from Mainz to expel the hostile spirit. Just as the priest commenced the exorcism, a barrage of stones unexpectedly hit him from behind. On November 29, 1591, the Lee family was bombarded with stones raining down in their home in Oxfordshire, England. The stones ranged in size from tiny pebbles to hefty rocks weighing over 22 pounds. They searched the area for any signs of a culprit, but astonishingly, there were no suspects and no holes in the ceiling where the stones could have come from. This strange phenomenon ceased in May 1592, coinciding with the death of their eldest son, George, who was 22 years old. Across the Atlantic Ocean, another stone-throwing poltergeist began an attack on the home of George Walton in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, in June 1685. A shower of several hundred pebbles fell on the roof of the house. The family rushed outside and found themselves in the middle of a rain of stones. They could see that the pebbles were appearing out of thin air several feet above the house. The shower soon stopped, but it repeated a few days later and continued randomly several times until around November, when the attacks ended. On a crisp autumn day in 1878, a significant event unfolded in Akron, Ohio. German immigrants Michael Metzler and his wife Maria had come to the United States seeking a better life. They resided in Akron for about 10 years until 1878, when they moved into a larger brick home located at 1219 High Street. The locals referred to the area as Hell's Half Acre, a working-class neighborhood infamous for the brawls instigated by inebriated workers from the Akron Iron Company. In this rough neighborhood, Michael and Maria raised their 6 children, aged 1 to 13, along with Maria's 72-year-old mother, Bridget Noss. To support his family, Michael worked as a plasterer at a local factory. On the sunny Tuesday morning of October 8th, Maria Metzler was busy husking corn in the nearby field when she suddenly found herself being bombarded with stones. Unable to identify the source of the assault, she hurried back to the safety of her home. Shortly after, her children went outside to complete their chores when they, too, were hit by rocks ranging in size from walnuts to chicken eggs. Once they took refuge indoors, they talked about the events and concluded that someone was orchestrating a cruel prank. The next evening, Mrs. Metzler tried to husk corn in the field once again. To her surprise, it happened again. More stones, this time accompanied by clumps of earth, flew at Maria. The outdoor events continued, and by Thursday morning, the stone hurling invaded the safety of their home. Maria and her 10-year-old daughter Emma were outside near a door leading to the cellar when a large pebble was suddenly thrown from inside, hitting the young girl in the face. Meanwhile, the eldest daughter, Mary, was seated in a chair inside the home when a stone struck her. Occasionally, pieces of coal and brick replaced the stones that were thrown. All these objects seemed to fall directly from the ceiling or were inexplicably launched from the shadowy corners of the room. News traveled rapidly among the town's 6,500 residents. Friends and neighbors came together to hold a vigil outside the house, eagerly watching for any signs of poltergeist activity. The reactions mirrored those you might see today. Some laughed at the Metzler family, while others were eager to be part of the spectacle. A few locals speculated about the causes behind the phenomena. Rumors circulated quickly, ranging from simple tricks to supernatural explanations. Perhaps Bridget Noss was a witch, or maybe one of the Metzler daughters had honed her skills in discreetly throwing objects. Throughout this incident, various journalists visited the Metzlers' home and became part of the narrative when they, too, were pelted with wet, warm rocks. Before long, the story gained national attention, a remarkable achievement for 140 years ago. Akron City Times reported on the crowds on October 16th.
So great has the excitement become that on Sunday, it was estimated that nearly 2,000 persons visited the premises. In the evening, the crowd took the form of a mob, and there were numerous altercations and disturbances.
By the following week, the troubled family reached their limit. They decided to seek professional assistance. Mr. Metzler enlisted the help of Reverend John Baptist Brune, the pastor of St. Bernard Catholic Church, to perform an exorcism on the entity that had been throwing rocks. Reverend Brown reached the Metzler residence at 10 p.m. that night and offered prayers to drive away the malevolent presence. Just after completing the sacred rites, 2 stones suddenly dropped at his feet, narrowly avoiding him. In the 1929 edition of Akron Topics magazine, reporter William Montgomery Clemens, who was the nephew of the well-known author and satirist Mark Twain, shared his experience visiting the Metzlers and what he referred to as the stone-throwing ghost in 1878. He wrote,
"We entered the living room, securing the 2 windows and doors by closing and locking them. I sat beside the grandmother, holding both of her hands, while the little girl sat on my companion's lap. Mr. Metzler was away at the factory where he worked. Mrs. Metzler was seated by the stove, knife in hand as she peeled potatoes, with a large pan resting at her feet. This setting was ripe for either tragedy or comedy. What unfolded? I inquired about Mrs. Metzler's interpretation of the unusual occurrence. Tears welled in her eyes as she extended her arm, knife in hand, emphasizing her words with a cry. It is a curse upon this family. At that moment, a small stone, resembling a hickory nut in size and shape, fell seemingly from the ceiling and struck her arm. The stone felt warm and moist. Shortly after, a larger stone, about the size of an egg, dropped and lightly tapped my shoulder before landing at my feet, remaining perfectly still on the floor like a piece of putty. On that memorable morning, more stones fell from what seemed to be the ceiling. We eagerly awaited their descent, noticing that they all appeared to originate about 8 to 10 inches below the intact ceiling plaster. While the stones caused no harm, they left us in profound amazement.
2 weeks later, the phenomenon ceased as mysteriously as it had started. The happenings at the Metzler house were never clarified, leaving the incident an enduring enigma. The farmhouse became a saloon called Dreyer's Saloon not long after they moved. Then it was demolished, and now a parking lot covers the site where the house once stood, south of the Little Cuyahoga River, located on the east side of what is now South Broadway Street, approximately 300 feet north of East Voris Street in South Akron. Could Bridget Noss, the supposed witch, and her granddaughter Emma have crafted an intricate prank? Or is there a darker influence behind the poltergeist occurrences in Akron and other historical events?